Today's talk is titled A Sense of Place, to be delivered by John Loring. As some of you may know, John Loring is a retired architect and middle school teacher. You may not know that thanks to his great-grandfather, who arrived in Southern California in 1854 at the age of 14, John is almost a fourth-generation Californian. He supports a variety of causes from A to Y. That is, from the Architectural Conservancy of Los Angeles to the Yosemite Conservancy, A to Y. He and his wife, Sue, live in Agoura Hills, close to where I used to live, very close actually, and have a house here in Cambria. From A to C, Agoura to Cambria. Welcome, John.
I don't know why I do this.
Thank you. Thank you.
But good morning to you all. So, a few years ago, I met a guy about my age who had grown up in Newport Beach, California. And he had lived most of his adult life, however, in South Carolina. And so I asked him, well, don't you kind of miss life in Southern California? And he said, I miss the California of my youth, but not what it is now. And so that comment, something about that comment just intrigued me. So that's what I want to talk about. We've all had places in our lives that are special. Places help define who we are individually as people. Our identity relates to, in part, to the context in which we live. So take a moment and think about some of the places that are important to you. We all have them. And that's what I want to talk about today, place, a sense of place. So part of what I'm about to say will be obvious or random, and I hope in the end it will offer some food for thought. But sometimes I think it's worthwhile to step back and take a look at what's obviously obvious. So, what is place? If you think about good architecture, and I mean really good architecture, the idea of a sense of place becomes clear. If you see a Zen temple, for example, it is probably in Japan. It has a certain location. You look at a French chateau or an Italian villa, and there's no doubt, one's in France, they can only do that there, and one's in Italy. Each has a sense of place. A prairie-style house of Frank Lloyd Wright can best be found in the American Midwest. Is that beautiful? Even in Cambria, at least once upon a time, when Sue and I started coming here in the early 1970s, there was a vernacular style going on that spoke to sense of place. They were wood houses, handmade wood houses, which created a specific idea of, where they were. Now this shot here, I'll give that one to Randy. That's not what I had in mind, but it too has its sense of place to it. You all know that house downtown. In religion, I checked my 4,000-page Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, and there was no listing for place because it's too damn obvious, right? But from the Garden of Eden to Calvary Hill, the stories have settings, places. Great religions are often identified with place. Mecca, Jerusalem, Tibet. When Brigham Young and the Mormons finally arrived in Utah, he said famously, "This is the place." And they even engraved it on the monument there. This is the place. When the early Aztecs arrived in central Mexico, they saw an eagle holding a rattlesnake in its beak. And this is a depiction that would later appear on Mexico's national flag. And when they came upon that scene, they knew it was the place. And a great theocracy was born. So, places often have a spiritual side. Early on for Jesus, the place was the wilderness. 40 days. In his novella, The Red Pony, John Steinbeck has an episode where an old paisano man comes back to the rancho where he was born in order to die. He wants to go out where he had come in. This was a spiritual thing. However, he is refused his request profanely by the new ranch owner, an American. And so this old man goes off to the Santa Lucia Mountains of the Big Sur to die, a sacred place close to God. Sometimes significant places are created. Think Stonehenge or the Great Pyramids. In nature, sometimes mountains, rivers, or lands are designated as sacred places. Now, there's a film called Louisiana Story, made by Robert and Frances Flaherty in 1948, which I had hoped to have a clip of as part of this service today, but technically it was challenging. Anyway, in that film, in the opening sequence, we see this young kid, this boy, Louisiana boy, who on his little canoe floats through this magical, mystical swamp, and it's just captivating. It's 3 or 4 minutes of just this guy gliding through this swamp, and it's amazing. Every Sunday, Sue, or whoever is in charge, talks about the lands here as being sacred to the people who preceded us here. Okay, so there's also another type, which is a hybrid. A natural place is enhanced by something created by people. Now, in Mount Nebo, at Mount Nebo in Jordan, this is where Moses looked out across the Dead Sea to the Promised Land and where he died before he got there. This has been the site of several churches and monasteries through the centuries. So you have the high mountain and the man-made creations. If you go around the world to the lowlands of the Himalayas in Bhutan, the Tiger's Nest, a Buddhist monastery. Anybody been there? It's worth a trip. If not, just up the road from here, about 2 miles above Highway 1, near the settlement of Lucia, there is a beautiful Benedictine monastery and chapel called the Hermitage at Carmadallo. We discovered it by accident, and they welcome visitors, and it would be an incredible place to retreat and to meditate. If you're not aware of it, it's in our neighborhood. But, here's a but. Places don't have to be exceptionally architectural, spiritual, or natural, by the way. They may be quite ordinary. Consider Steinbeck's descriptions of the ranch in The Red Pony, which Sue read earlier. They are most ordinary, and yet special. And again, think about the places that are important to you. So, the first conclusion is having a sense of place is important. They become part of who we are, and there are three things I'd like to say about all this. First, it is important to acknowledge, appreciate, explore, and/or enjoy our special places. Mindfulness is the current term. Henry David Thoreau of Walden Pond said, "There is enough of interest to engage a person for a lifetime within a 20-mile radius of their home." Charles Darwin, after his voyage on the Beagle, returned to his home in England and spent much of the rest of his life studying earthworms on his land. Isaac Newton deduced the nature of gravity from a simple apple tree near his house. And the apple tree is still there, by the way, and alive. I bet you weren't expecting this, but if you're Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, you write a poignant song about your room. Not only does it sell millions, but it speaks to generations. Then there's this guy, Claude Monet, the French Impressionist, who spent 43 years looking at water lilies in his garden in Giverny. That's kind of making the most of your surroundings. It's important to have mindfulness about a place. Okay, the second thing I want to mention, worth noting, it has to do with the idea of stewardship. And this is an idea that goes back to the book of Genesis. The idea of taking care of a place. This may involve heavy commitments to social causes or something as simple as picking up trash on a local beach walk. Stewardship. And then there's the ultimate place for which we need to be a steward, which is our planet. Okay. The last thing I want to lift up here is a philosophical side to all this. In Brian Wilson's autobiography, he talks about taking a girlfriend to his old family house in Hawthorne, California, where back in the day, the Beach Boys started, and also the Schwalbes. Live nearby, I guess, 20 blocks away, I guess. So Brian gets to the location only to discover that the home, the neighborhood have been replaced by a freeway. The home is not physically there, but remains present in his head, sort of like this guy from Newport Beach who misses the Southern California of his youth. So in this way, maybe Thomas Wolfe was right. You can't go home again. Not to the place and the life that once were. Places change. They have an ephemeral quality. But notice this. Other places don't seem to change. One of my favorite places on the whole world is a large granite rock on Lake Tenaya in the Yosemite High Country. I can't tell you how many years I have fished there with my family and friends. My kids and my grandchildren fish there now. Recently, I was surprised to discover an old photo of my long departed parents back in the early 1940s, standing on that very rock. That rock and its setting will be there long after I'm gone. My son and grandchildren will continue to fish there for however long. And that rock and that setting will remain unchanged. Here, we people are the ephemeral ones. But over the millennia in geological time, that rock and its setting will change. Not just as quickly as what we experience as change in our own lives. Everything, every place, ultimately is in process, some more rapidly than others. This is what we live with. It may make us feel a little insecure, but as Alan Watts wrote, there is wisdom in insecurity. The good news for us, I think, is that the places that we have and are important may be seen as making up an ongoing series of safe harbors along the way as we sail through our lives. Places to pause, get our bearings, enjoy, safeguard, and move on. Indeed, they help to define who we are, and so thanks indeed for a sense of place. Amen.